This is another iRaw podcast.
One of those moments in a movie, wind through the hair, beautiful, gorgeous green around you. I think that area, that cinnamon and in Bali, you just have many of those moments.
Welcome to Wild Development Studio. Join us as we venture into the breathtaking realm of wildlife arts and untamed adventures. With captivating stories from the field and ideas to dive into the visual arts, we'll ignite your passion for conservation. Get ready to develop something wild.
Welcome to Wild Developments. I'm your guide, Lauren, and today we are talking to Geleen. She is a solo travel confidence and connection coach who focuses on helping women achieve transformational personal growth through solo travel. She understands you because it was her in your shoes not too long ago. Traveling to nearly 40 countries, mostly solo, helped Geleen master the art of staying organized, problem solving, and planning. But more importantly, travel allowed her to rediscover her confidence and make meaningful connections all over the world. It helped her look inward, realizing her strengths, and grow exponentially. Solo travel doesn't have to be difficult or long to shape you. It's the act itself, the empowerment you feel, that will change your life. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to meet you.
Too. And you've started this really cool website, Travel Not to Escape. Can you tell us what your journey was like before all that? And then what inspired you to get started with it?
Oh, yes. Very, very long journey. I mean, I think like everyone else, you go down the same road of a university, a lot of pressure to succeed. And meanwhile, there was always this like feeling I had in me that like, this isn't it. Like as I was, going to school, I studied neuroscience and the path initially was to become a neurologist. And it's like I was going down that path, potentially, more so for my family. But then as I was going through it, I was like, this isn't it, this isn't it. But I'm just gonna keep going. And then I had the opportunity to study abroad, which just opened up my world. And upon coming back, I just couldn't get out of my head. And it was one of the things that I kept thinking as I was going through my career, climbing up the ladder. And then I was drawn to solo traveling at the age of 25. And yeah, ever since then, it's been such a catalyst for me to change my life, which is why I now created Travel Not to Escape, as well as empower other women to also use solo travel as a catalyst to change their lives because it gives you so much perspective and allows you to see that version of yourself and not just see it, but actually live it abroad so that you can come back and then do the work to make your day-to-day life more aligned to that version of you that you really enjoy and that fulfills you. So that's really what my passion is using travel as a means for people to step into that next level version of themselves.
So do you focus only on like solo travel abroad, or is it all sorts of solo travel?
All sorts of solo travel. I think anything where you are branching yourself out, even incrementally. I think that's my biggest tip for women that are wanting to go on this adventure and they think, oh, I have to do a one-way trip across the world in order for it to count. No, you can go on a tour, a guided tour in your own city. And I think it's that energy that you bring in that exploration that really changes you in some way because it's you choosing to do something for you, choosing to put yourself out to your outside of your comfort zone. And by doing that, seeing the world slightly differently. So in all shapes, forms, I love what solo travel can bring to you.
That last year, for the first time, I did a solo trip to Cades Cove in Tennessee. It's kind of over by Gatlinburg, and it's known for like their bears and the wildlife and stuff in that area.
I love that.
And it was such a transformative experience for me that I've now made it a yearly thing. And it just gives me a chance to recenter myself and I can
Mhm.
do whatever I want. That's like the most freeing and
Yes.
amazing part. So
Yes.
what is it about solo travel for you that you really look forward to?
Exactly what you said. You could do whatever you want. And I think someone who's a recovering people pleaser like myself, who had built my whole life and career off of, what my family's expectations were, I think once I finally released that, solo travel gave me that ability to see what life could be like if I chose it on my own terms, if I made decisions because I wanted to make them. And I think that that's why it's so addicting. And I mean, I've made it my lifestyle. So I solo travel full time. I don't have a base. It's been 4 years now since I gave everything up in the US. And it's something that really invigorates me as well, because it's you can land in a new city and you're the same person, but you learn so many things, and you grow that much more exponentially with each trip as well. So I think that that's something that I haven't been able to duplicate in any other form.
So if you haven't had like a home base in 4 years, that means everything that you own is that like with you
A
in a
suitcase, yes.
suitcase. Wow. Okay. So
I
what
have
does that look
optimized.
like?
Yeah, so when I first started, it's so funny. I started in the pandemic, and it was post heartbreak, and I was just visiting my friend in New York. I was living in Chicago at the time, and she's like, "Come to New York to stay with us for a couple months. We'll do a little pandemic group together." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And in that process, I had gotten rid of most of my things in my Chicago apartment and drove from Chicago to New York. So I had a good amount of stuff with me still, probably like two large suitcases, like a few bags. And in that process, from moving from New York to making this a full-time thing for me, I've slowly slimmed everything down and optimized it. So now I am down to one checked in luggage, like a medium size, one backpack with all of my tech in it, and then a personal item. And that is what I call my life and my home. There are some things that I keep at my parents' house, of course, like memories, like my stuffed animal. So that's still around from my childhood. And my coats, all of the coats that I needed to survive the Chicago winters are with a friend in Chicago. So besides those, just living out of the suitcase.
That is amazing. That's one of the things that I love about travel. It's like I got my suitcase and my book bag and maybe my purse or whatever, and that's all I need.
Hmm.
And it just feels so freeing. And then I come back home and I'm like, why do I have all this stuff? Like I
Yeah.
always think, oh, I'm gonna save it because I'm gonna need it later. And it's like I never use it. I need to
Yeah,
take a page out of your
honestly,
book.
I'm a recovering hoarder. I will say, like, not to the TV show extremes, but I remember at the peak of kind of like my unhappiness, I would use shopping as a way. I was like, "Oh, shopping therapy is great." And like next thing I knew, my whole like bedroom was so filled with things. I couldn't enter my closet. I couldn't really sleep on my bed. There were like so many things there. And that process, that was when I was living in San Diego, that process of getting rid of everything in San Diego to move to Chicago, it like was so cleansing. And ever since I had to physically go through all of those things that I purchased on a whim or because I thought it was going to fill some need in me, getting rid of that initial phase, it really helped me now to where I'm living out of a suitcase, which is, if I were to think back to like 10 years ago me, and she with that like apartment filled of all the things, every kitchen item that you could probably imagine, like to now, she'd be like, who are you? Like, how did you get there?
So, okay, well, then let me ask you this because you brought up like kitchen utensils and things like that. So, what does eating healthy and kind of balancing look like? Or do you cook from, are you in a hotel? Are you in a like a temporary living situation? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I usually travel and stay in Airbnbs, or if I have slowed down my travels. So before I was staying like once a month in cities, and I realized that was not sustainable for me to be able to work at the same time and have a routine and make meaningful connections. So my ideal now is at minimum 3 months, and around the 6 month mark is when I start to get like that travel itch to go. I'm actually close to that mark right now, and I'm planning a trip next month for my next destination. But uh in terms of food, it depends on the city. And what I love about being abroad is that even eating out is so much more affordable compared to, of course, being in the US. And like one single lunch could be like $20 or $30 in the US. Whereas I'm about to head to Da Nang, and my whole day's worth of meals could be like $10. And that's like healthy, fresh foods. There's a lot of fresh like fruit markets anywhere actually in the world. I've been living in Latin America and Asia mostly in the last few years. And there's always some fresh veggie stand around, healthy food options. Like I was in Bali for 4 months, and oh my God, the healthiest place. Like everything was like vegan options, everything was so colorful and beautiful. And again, like my whole day's worth of meals was like $10 to $15. So sometimes it's more affordable for me to just eat out every meal because uh it's just easily accessible and it's already done. And there's also like depending on where I stay, I might not have a full kitchen. So most times I do opt for a full kitchen, so I have the option. So I'll do like Airbnbs, but sometimes like Bali, for example, they don't necessarily have as many accommodations with full kitchens. They mostly have you have like a room in a homestay situation, or they have like hotel style living accommodations there. So it's much harder to cook for yourself in that city.
Your the name of your company, Travel Not to Escape. It's so cool because it makes you like stop and think about travel and what that means to you. And so with that name, what does that mean to you? What do you travel to do?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So I loved it because I was actually on a different podcast, and she's like, "What do you want to name this episode?" I'm like, "Oh, Travel Not to Escape," and that's how I got the name. And I thought of the quote, "We travel not to escape life, but for not life not to escape us," and so that's where I pulled that from. And it's such a beautiful quote because it's true. Like we can use travel to reinvigorate ourselves. So I think that's one aspect of it. The not to escape part comes from the fact that I was using travel to escape initially. I was using it to escape a life where I didn't actually choose. I didn't feel like I chose my life at that point. Again, as I mentioned, I had like people pleasing tendencies. And so uh, I just kept going on solo trips to run away to just get a taste of what life would be like if I were to choose it on my own. And then it finally hit me after a series of rock bottoms and therapy sessions, of course. It finally hit me like I can have the one life. I don't necessarily have to keep running away from my own life. So that's really the big part of it is I want other people to see that too, that they don't have to travel to live that version of themselves that they're wanting to live, that they can, of course, it's going to be hard to make some changes to, get rid of your hoarder apartment and like live out of a suitcase if that's what you want to do. But, it's once you make those changes, you are so much lighter in all senses of that word. So for me, travel and the three pillars of the company include that transformation, but it also includes connection and play. Connection being such an important thing for humanity. And as I've been traveling, the longer that you travel, the longer you realize that connection and community is the most important thing. You will see many beautiful sights, many beautiful temples, but after you see like 100 temples, you're like, okay, what else? And it's the people that really set the destinations apart for me. So the connection piece is huge, and play. Because as you're doing these deep transformational work and asking yourself all these questions, I think that you can balance it out with some lighter, playful energy, and you can do deep work and you can do deep play at the same time. And so it's really the harmony of those three intentions that make up the company.
So you have a quiz on your website about play personality. I got
Mm-hmm.
explorer.
Oh,
What are
yeah.
you? And then how does this information, how does that factor into our travel experience?
Yeah, so that is the lens with which I try to direct people to see their travel and their lives. Because at the end of the day, we were born into in this world, and we were already the souls that we were going to be. Like there were certain things that lit us up as a kid that we can't explain why, but they did. And for, our adulthood, we lose touch with that connection to our inner child, to that lightness, that play that we used to have. And so this quiz is really just a bit of a glimpse into what lights you up and how can you bring that into not just your travel life, but into all aspects of your life. Because play really is the foundation for connection. It's the foundation for the transformation that you're doing. So, for example, as an explorer, you're an explorer play personality. So there are 8 play personalities, and this is based off of a play researcher. He did like thousands of play histories on people, condensed it down into 8 categories. And with an explorer energy, this is basically telling you that what lights you up is learning more, seeing more. And that could be in the physical world, it could be in like the intellectual, mental, emotional, but essentially exploring all the depths within you and within the world and then outside of the world. So you're just very curious in general of an individual, and how that translates to everyday life, which that means, in what ways are you exploring in your life right now? Are you learning things that are new? Are you exploring, things within you and asking yourself questions? Are you going out into the world and seeing new things? And if you are not activating that explorer energy in your everyday life, then you're probably feeling like a bit of a lightness is missing. You're probably feeling really heavy and overburdened and maybe overwhelmed with the things that are happening in your day to day. So when people are feeling that way, that's the first question I ask them is, okay, you're an explorer play personality. What are you doing in your life that feels like play to you in this aspect? And let's start to bring those things back in.
Yeah, I'm definitely the type that is always like learning something, taking some sort of online
Mhm.
class or whatever, and like reading the description online. It was like scuba diver, zip line. I'm like, yep, I do all those
Yeah.
things. So it was totally like hit the nail on the head for me. I'm gonna have links to your website and of course the website or the and links to the
Play
quiz
personality.
all on
Yes.
the show notes so everybody else can go figure out what their play personality is too. Now, do you have a favorite spot that you have traveled and like the scene outside just completely took your breath away?
Oh man, so many different places, but I will say Bali because that was the last place I was visiting, and I love it there because there's a place that I went to just east of Ubud, and it's called Cinnamon. So still very picturesque, rice fields covered in rice fields. And it was a couple of friends and we went and took our, what are they called? Like motor, uh,
You know,
I don't even
moped.
remember scooters. Yeah, mopeds, like scooters. So we took two scooters and we went over to Cinnamon from Ubud on like a weekend trip. And just being on the back of a moped with like the wind hitting your face, driving through like rice fields and like it's like sunny but not too hot, and it was just one of those moments in a movie. I feel like that you're just wind through the hair, beautiful, gorgeous green around you, and that I think that area, that Cinnamon and in Bali, it's you just have many of those moments.
Wow. So when you first traveled alone, how did you prepare for something like that? And in what areas did you feel unprepared?
Oh, yes. Okay, so this is the reason for the company actually, and I have a solo travel confidence workbook that's free that I just created, because I've gotten this question asked before, and I was like, oh, I should make something. So I have that on my website as well. Because when I first started solo traveling at the age of 25, it was not because I wanted to. It was because I had made a promise to myself at the age of 20 when I was studying abroad, and I was so distraught when I was coming back to like my quote unquote life, right? Like it's like, oh, but this is the life I want. I want to live in Italy. And I have to go back and finish my degree and be super stressed. And I don't even, right. So I made a promise to myself at that moment before I left Italy. And I said, no matter what, like, gotta promise 25-year-old Geleen's gonna come back to Rome. And if she can come back to Rome, then 30-year-old Geleen's gonna need to move and live a travel lifestyle. So those I don't even know where that message came from me, but that was a promise that I made myself, and I was already. When you wish at the Trevi Fountain, like you get like three wishes. The first one is to come back to Rome, so that was what was in my mind. But I already knew I was like, no matter what, I have to make this happen. This is for me. So when I finally was turning 25, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. I had like saved up all my vacation, and then no friends or anyone could go with me because at that age, of course, in the US, it's hard to afford travel or vacation time. So I was like, well, I have to go. Like this is so pivotal to my life, and I could feel it. So I went. I did everything wrong. And because it was in 2014 as well, right? So in 2014, we didn't really have GPS or all these translator apps. I was using paper maps still. That was the majority. And a lot of places like I mean, I went back to Rome a lot afterwards and they speak English and everything's so much easier. But back then, man, it was really rough to get around. So I I will say that I think some of my mistakes, I could boil it down to the fact that I chose random itineraries online. I didn't do a lot of planning ahead of time. I stayed in hostels, co-ed and female only. And I was trying to create this solo travel trip that I saw in the movies or saw and heard from other people, whatever it was, but I didn't stop and ask myself, like, what am I actually needing from this trip? And how can I plan this trip so that it gives me what I need? It was a lot more self-reflection that I needed to do that I encourage other people to do now. And so that's actually what the workbook is all about, is asking all these intentional self-reflection questions so you can design a trip that's going to actually meet your expectations because you know what your expectations are. For me, I was like, I'm just gonna go. And then one weekend, I'm like, I'm miserable. I feel paranoid. I'm not staying in the great area. Like, I don't like sleeping in this hostel of 12 people. I don't love the party scene here. And it was just, I was doing all these things and I wasn't sleeping and I was taking public transportation that I wasn't comfortable doing overnight. And I just was in this heightened hypervigilant state the whole time. And it wasn't until I pivoted my mindset towards the end of that trip to where I slowed things down. I got an Airbnb right when that Airbnbs were first new, actually. That was like very first Airbnb experience. And then started to do things like incorporate art back into my life. And then the things that I saw unintentionally, I was leaning into my play personalities before I realized what play personalities were, and those were what lit me up. So that's what I encourage other people to do now is don't just take an itinerary online or sit to take social media as your planning tool. Like, start with you first and what it is that you're wanting to get out of the experience.
I love that you said being intentional, because nowadays everything is like instant and we got to have it now and just kind of
Mhm.
like whatever you're feeling like in a whim. But even when I'm interviewing people talking about nature and how to get into nature, the first thing everybody says is like, just do it and be intentional about it. And I think
Mhm.
we've lost that along the way with all of our technology and stuff like that. But I love also that you're using technology to help you out as far as like translators and
Mhm.
trying to figure out where to go and things like that. That's
Mhm.
great advice. What about for women traveling alone? How can we feel safe while we're out in the world?
Yeah. So I focus specifically on confidence, right? And when you're not feeling confident in traveling, it's because you don't have the information that you need to feel confident. And I think it's just an information aspect. So, for example, you might feel a little apprehensive going to a new city because of safety, right? And that's just because you don't know what the safety levels are. You don't know where in that city is going to be safe for you, things that you can do, people that you can meet, and so it's all boiled down to research and understanding where you're at. So, for example, in that workbook, I walk people through, okay, what is your confidence level right now as a solo traveler? Have you been before? If not, like, put a one. At least we know where you're at. And if you're at that one where you're like, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I can navigate, I'm like feeling really unsafe, uncertain, then let's work with that, right? So that means instead of staying in a hostel an hour away from the city center without anyone who speaks English, maybe we have to increase the budget, but that means bringing you into the city center with a place that has a 24-hour security and an English speaking concierge that has guided tours and a guided tour guide that speaks English that can, bring you to like local places that you do feel safe doing. So it's a lot more planning and intentionality in that regard. But starting from where you're at, then it's like, okay, well, these are the levers that we can pull to make you feel more comfortable versus someone who's like, oh yeah, I've backpacked around the world, I've hitchhiked, I've done all these things. It's like, okay, cool, yeah, go stay in the hostel like an hour away, you'll be able to make it. Like you're fine. You have that confidence already to like plop you into any part of the world and you're good, right? So just meet yourself where you're at and then plan according to that.
Great advice. Do you have must-haves in your travel bag? Like when I travel,
Yeah.
I have like this little tiny blanket that kind of feels like my blanket at home. And I have to have that in a blow-up pillow because you never know what the pillow situation is going to be like anywhere.
Yeah.
So those are kind of my like must-haves. Do you have anything?
Yeah, so I travel with everything in my life, right? So there's some weird things that I'm like looking around me right now. I'm like, there's some weird things that I bring. I have a collapsible foam roller and a foldable yoga mat. So those take up probably like 5 pounds total between the two of them, but they're so essential. Like I'm getting old. My back hurts. Like I gotta stretch it out, especially after those long flights. So those are a couple of more like the unique, like random things that people might not think of when they're thinking of traveling. Um, Otherwise, just I have a lot of tech as well, doing podcasting on the road. So I have a full tripod, ring lights. I have this mic stand, like multiple, like a detachable monitor, wireless keyboard. Like my whole backpack is basically just tech, and it's quite heavy. But those are basically like the essentials that I bring that you wouldn't think of if you were just vacationing.
Oh, you're abroad right now, aren't you?
Yes, yes, I am. I'm in the Philippines.
So like going from place to place and doing a podcast, do you ever run into difficulties with Wi-Fi or charging or anything like that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a system. So I have three charge external batteries, and I keep those charged, and that will keep me lasting for a full day even if I'm working at a cafe. So I'll charge my computer, my phones. I have two phones, because you need two phones when you're abroad just in case. And the other thing is Wi-Fi. So I do choose Airbnbs that have Wi-Fi that is stable, and I ask them for screenshots of the speed test each time before I even book. And then I look through the reviews. It's like I'm very particular about that. I also get phone plans, local phone plans and eSIMs in order to make sure I have like a backup Wi-Fi system. And I also touch into the co-working offices in that local city. So if all else fails, I can head to a co-working office within like 15 minutes and be able to set up. So there's various levels, I think, to the backing up. But for example, in Bali, like the Airbnb that I booked, the Wi-Fi was not great, even though the speed tests were good. It's just it wasn't enough to be able to do podcasting. So then I would book rooms in the local co-work and end up having to do membership there. So you work with it. You work with what you got. Or for example, the last couple of months there's been construction where I've been staying. So I batch recorded some episodes when there wasn't construction, and then I continued on. So I haven't actually recorded anything in the last couple of months for that reason, but I had enough episodes. So it's a lot of planning and navigating around.
Do you think that the virus changed the traveling landscape, and is it still something that, gosh, 4 years later we're seeing the repercussions from today?
Oh, I mean, yes, of course. Everything was at a standstill for so long. I will say though that in some ways it's allowed for a lot more people to work remotely and get that taste of what freedom, location freedom could look like. I mean, I know the last couple of years they've been massively trying to pull everyone back into the office. And I think with that, we're kind of going back to where we were before. And corporations are trying to make everyone forget what remote work looks and feels like. But I think, you can't unsee or unfeel or unlive this lifestyle. So a lot of people like myself who were able to take the opportunity to work remotely during the pandemic, it's hard to go back. And I think a lot of us have stayed out for that reason. And I think that, in the last couple of years, it's rebounded. So I have seen the travel industry rebound, and there's a lot more people going to Europe. I mean, this year is an Olympic year in Paris, so it's going to be like massive. So it's weird in some cases because it almost feels like nothing's changed post-COVID, except that you'll see things in like different impacts in like the way that, oh, maybe there's more regulation around this check-in procedure or government rules regarding it. But for the most part, like at least the COVID restrictions have lifted. And I think a lot of more people are traveling. That's kind of impacted by the recession at the moment as well too, though. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. There's a lot of like moving parts, but I think for people that are living my specific lifestyle as a digital nomad, COVID was a big year and there was a massive increase of remote workers living abroad for that reason.
You know what I was going to ask you? You were talking about you asked the Airbnb host for screenshots and stuff like that. Did you talk to every host beforehand? Because I just had a horrible Airbnb experience. I'm in the process of trying to get my money back. It wasn't as advertised. And that's the first time in, oh gosh, like maybe 10 years of doing this that I've had a bad experience. Have you had any bad experience like that? Or do you do a lot of research and communicating with the host beforehand?
Yeah, so before I even started traveling, I had to book locations for company retreats back in early in my career. And I had a horrible, horrible situation where I didn't communicate with the Airbnb host. It was actually VRBO. Never used them again after that. But I communicated with the VRBO. I booked it a month in advance. And day of, I had no check-in procedures. I had nothing. We were supposed to host a company retreat there. I had nothing. I ended up going there, ended up getting in the house, but there was like no electricity, no, like we couldn't host it there essentially. And the whole process was awful. So since then, my learning lesson was even if you were to send a random question, like just do it just to see that the host is responsive. So I have a list of questions that I ask before I book, the speed test being one of them. But I also ask, is there 24-hour security, or is it a camera, or what type of concierge is there? Is it on the first floor or on like a higher level floor? Is there an elevator that is accessible through that? Where does the windows face? Is it facing a building or is it facing outward? Things like that, like washing machine, housekeeping, is that included? Electricity, is that included? Is there like a big mold smell that's common? So there's now a list of criteria that I ask. And I don't do it all at once. Of course, I'll start off with like, oh, like a couple questions, just want to confirm. And then as I'm like going through, I'll like ask a few more and see if they're responsive, if they're friendly. And you really need to do this back and forth with the host. Otherwise, you could get into a situation where like they're not responding, or they give short answers, or they don't have the things that you're looking for, even though it has it listed on the site. So I've definitely had my fair share of like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. But for the most part, after going through a lot of those filters, I can basically find like a good apartment.
That's good to know. Yeah. It's just the worst feeling to be somewhere new and to show up and it's not what you were expecting, or you're even in an unsafe area or something like that. We've had that too.
Yeah.
Everything else was fine. It was just they had a sign on the bedroom door that said homeless people will knock on this in the middle of the night. Don't open the door. And I'm like, okay, I'm not safe staying here.
Were you in Portland?
It was in Indianapolis. It was a cute little
wow.
store converted into an Airbnb, and it was like totally adorable, kind of set up like the 50s. And then you just go in the back, the master bedroom, and it went out to the parking lot. And they're like, whatever you do, don't open this door. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're gonna go to a hotel now.
Yeah, you gave me flashbacks. I said Portland because you gave me flashbacks. So I was like, oh, we ended up in this really cute Airbnb. It was me and my friend. And oh God, I don't know if you have time, but like essentially I got in, my friend got in first. I got in, and once she was out, and like I just went to sleep. And we were the next morning, woke up, and she was like, oh, did you move the fans? Like there were like standing fans that were facing both of our rooms when we woke up. She's like, oh, looks like you got hot in the middle of the night. And when I got back, I saw that you had moved the fans. I was like, no, I passed out before moving the fans. So then we had this thing of like, who moved the fans, who turned them on, who plugged them in, turned them on, and faced them into our bedrooms. That was the big question. Yeah.
Oh, you just gave me chills.
And Yeah. So we never saw a body, but we discovered a bit of a closet and an open window that potentially could have been a squatter. And it would be the only way to explain the fact that there were movements in the house that we couldn't explain. Like I was being crazy. I was taking videos after we left the house and then before we got back in just to see like did anything move, and yes, things moved. And so we actually ended up staying because Portland's hard to find an apartment in, and like the landlords were really nice. So we're like, okay, if we just like check all the things and like
Oh
maybe we
man.
could just stay for the week. Yeah. So sometimes you get into that situation where you're like, what do I do? And yeah, I mean, we probably should just left and gone to a hotel as well.
Oh gosh. Oh, we are almost out of time. I'm gonna have to get you on again to have more
Yeah.
story time. Before we go, how can people find you?
Yes. So if you head to travelnottoescape.com, you'll find everything on there. But honestly, my Instagram's probably going to be the best place to go because I keep an updated link site on there. So that Instagram is at Geleen on the go, and you'll find everything about the podcast, all of my free workbooks, free personality quiz for play, and any other fun things I'm working on there.
Great. And before we go, what is one tip that you have for someone that would like to connect with nature?
Yeah, so let's bring this back to the play personality. So use your play personality as a way to figure out what it is that will light you up while you're outside. So if you are, we said explorer personality, then start to do things in nature where you're learning and seeing new things and exploring. Versus if you are a kinesthetic type of person in kinesthetic play personality, I would recommend you doing active things in nature, moving your body, going on hikes, and maybe going on long treks or swimming, doing things where you're activating your physical body while you're in nature. Or if you're a creative play style, for example, then maybe go paint nature. Go put up an easel and see what you're seeing, or do some photography and be creative with it. So I think you can use play as a lens for how you want to interact with nature in a way that lights you up.
Till next time, get outside and see what develops.
Thanks for joining Wild Development Studio. We hope this exploration into the world of wildlife arts and adventure has sparked a desire to get outside and connect with something wild. If you have an adventure that's awe-inspiring, don't hesitate to share. Click the link in the description to submit your story to have it featured on our show or be a guest. Until next time, keep connecting to the wild and see what develops. The views, opinions, and statements expressed by individuals during Wild Development Studio productions do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Wild Development Studio or its affiliates. Participation in any activities, expeditions, or adventures discussed or promoted during our content may involve inherent risks. It is strongly advised that individuals conduct thorough research, seek professional guidance, and take all necessary precautions before engaging in any such activities. Wild Development Studio, its representatives, or employees shall not be held responsible for any injury, loss, damage, accident, or unforeseen incident that may occur as a result of participating in activities inspired by or discussed in our content. By choosing to engage with our content or act upon any information provided, individuals do so at their own risk and discretion.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.